Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the 6th installment of the USGS Hydrography Webinar Series. My name is Steve Achel. I'm one of the co-leads for hydrography for the moment. I'm just acting, but Al Ray is the other co-lead, and he's helping out here, and you'll hear from him in a little bit. We also want to introduce Sue Budo, who's on the phone, and will be helping with some of the questions and answer sessions later on in the call. Sue is our acting lead for Watershed Boundary Dataset. And then finally, Allison Jason is basically running the technology here and making sure the phones and the webinar and all these various gizmos work throughout the session and providing an invaluable service in that respect. So our topic today, and it is not, in fact, the fourth agenda, it's the sixth. Our two key talks today. The first one will be from Dr. David Tarbotton on high-resolution hydrography and hydrologic modeling. And then we will have a short break for questions and answers. As you can probably tell, there are quite a few people on the line, something approaching 200 attendees. So for questions and answers, we're going to handle that by the chat window in the WebEx interface, and Sue and Allison will take turns reading off those questions, and Dr. Tarbotton will do his best to answer them. And then,
Steve, it's labeled Q&A.
Q&A is what the label is in the interface. Very good.
Right.
And then, actually, I can't see the interface when I'm presenting here. And then we'll have an update from Al and Ellen Finelli with our National Geospatial Technical Operations Center on the NHD Plus high-res progress. They got a few data sets delivered right before Christmas, and it's actually kind of exciting. And then we'll have another Q&A session related to that. During the session, you may hear a little bit of chiming going on right now. During the session, most of the attendees will be placed in lecture mode, which means you can talk in the phone, but we won't hear any of it. Your dog can bark, whatever. So that's also why we're handling some of the question and answer through chat. Moving on through the session, if we don't get to your question, we will respond. We can tackle those by email, or we will also post this information on the NHD website along with a recording of the session that will provide something to refer back to later. And then at the end of the session, there will be a very short poll. We'd appreciate it if you provide some feedback on the session and maybe thoughts on some future sessions. So with that, I will pass the ball over to Dr. Tarbotton, and we can kick the show off here.
I'm David Tarbotton. I'm at Utah State University, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today. This talk about high-resolution hydrography and hydrologic modeling draws on ideas from research I've done on hydrologic digital elevation model analysis, GIS in hydrology, and really information systems and cyber infrastructure for advancing hydrology. My background has involved raster-based digital elevation model analysis, much more than hydrography, so there'll be a fair bit of a raster orientation to what I say. I should also note that some of the ideas here have come from collaborators that I've listed at the bottom. David Maidment, who I've worked with closely, and my student, Nazmus, and then I guess other students at Texas. And then I've also put a few slides in there on the GREAT project. So I've acknowledged the collaborators on that and appreciative of the funding from the various agencies that have supported this. So hydrologic models are required for forecasting, floodplain mapping, water quality assessments, river restoration, setting environmental flows, and land management. There was a grand challenge written by the National Research Council in 2001 that stated better hydrologic forecasting that quantifies effects and consequences of land surface change on hydrologic processes is something that should be done. So we really need modeling to inform the infrastructure that's going to protect us from things in the pictures at the bottom: floods and drought, natural disasters that sometimes aren't that natural, and with a bit of planning we could have avoided. So on this slide, I think this sentence in blue at the top captures nicely the goal of hydrologic modeling research. It's to advance the capability for hydrologic prediction by developing models that take advantage of new information and process understanding enabled by new technology. So this is part of the general trend to more explicit physically based spatially distributed models. As we get more data, the promise is that it's going to help our models have better predictions and also represent processes better. And that's where NHD and NHD Plus and high resolution hydrography in general come into it, because it's providing high resolution topography data that we can use in hydrologic models. The image at the right is a sort of generic hill slope representation that actually comes from the rhesus model. I'm going to give two examples. The first is going to be based on floodplain mapping, and that's going to be most of the presentation. Then I've got some slides at the end on sediment inputs from roads and the impacts on streams. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the questions and challenges faced as we go to high resolution. So there's an activity going on called the National Flood Interoperability Experiment that was conceived by David Maidment, and this got me involved into the question of floodplain mapping. And there we are really trying to go from weather forecasts put out by NOAA, simulated with models such as the WRF model, into hydrologic models, and in the case of this chain, it's the NOAA MP model. Then that goes into hydraulics models, and this is actually an animation from the RAPID model that one of David Maidment's students worked on in Texas, and then that would go into mapping of the sort of flood inundation and trying to get the information to the emergency responders that are trying to save lives. So that's the problem, and we can see in these pictures at the left that there's critical infrastructure that gets flooded, and damages can mount up. So NHFI, or the National Flood Interoperability Experiment, is really a community partnership between government and academic researchers. It's centered around the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa. That's really a partnership of many federal agencies. I think the National Weather Service is the lead, but USGS is certainly involved, FEMA is certainly involved, Army Corps of Engineers. And then the academic community is involved through COHASI, the Consortium of Universities for Advancement of Hydrologic Science, that is funded by the National Science Foundation. As part of the NHFI, we're really trying to extend to what's called here continental hydrology. Right now, the river forecasting system that's operated by the National Weather Service forecasts at 3,600 points nationally, and you can see the sort of coverage of them. And the typical basin that's used there is about 400 square miles. With NHFI, we're extending that to try and predict at every single reach and the catchments from NHD+. So this is where the connection to hydrography comes in, that would be forecasting at about a 1 square mile resolution and essentially becoming continuous across the continent. So what has to happen to get that done? So I showed earlier the pictorial representation where we're going from WRF to the weather model, then NOAA-MP as a hydrologic model, RAPID or SPRINT produce flows at stream reach scale, but we need things like the ability to obtain reach level hydraulic properties for input to those models for each of the 2.7 million reaches. We also need a way to map from the reach scale at which that information is being produced to stage and flood inundation. And the idea is to exploit high-resolution topography and the one-to-one relationship between the stream reaches, this is where hydrography comes in, and the catchments in terms of elevation. So this slide gives a few details on the SPRINT model. So this is a model developed by Ben Hodges at the University of Texas, and it solves the San Venant equations, which are the fundamental equations for hydraulics in channels, and it requires as inputs the hydraulic geometry, the cross-sectional area, the discharge, the wetted perimeter, and those sort of things. It actually takes advantage of parallel computing using some of the concepts involved in chip design. So there's a partnership between the Texas group and IBM in doing that. To provide some of the information needed, I've been throwing in some ideas related to my work on terrain analysis, and we've come up with this concept, or really started evaluating the concept of the height above the nearest stream for floodplain mapping. So the idea is, coming out of SPRINT, you would have a discharge in every single reach in, say, the National Hydrography Dataset. From that discharge, you can get a stage, an average stage over the reach. Then we compute from a digital elevation model the height above the stream. And the way that computation is done is you go to each grid cell on the terrain and effectively slide downhill following the flow directions until you hit the stream and record the elevation difference. Computationally, it's actually done in the opposite direction. It's done working back upwards from the stream, and every time you go back up, you look at what the elevation difference is and add it, because that works out more logically as a way to compute it. So we've got a raster that gives the height above the stream. We've got the catchments, which are the basic modeling elements being used for the hydrology, and we've got the individual stream reaches. They are connected through the COM-ID as the unique identifier in the data set that connects catchments and flow lines. So for each reach with a certain depth, you can then use that value within the catchment to identify the inundation map. So that's quite a nice connection between vector GIS information and raster GIS information. So one of the points that's going to be coming out of this is an importance for all of this information to be consistent within itself. So to do that, we used the Taudium software. This is software that my group has developed over the years that really does stream and watershed delineation. It has as one of its capabilities a multiple flow direction flow field model for the calculation of flow-based derivative surfaces, and this drop to stream is an ideal use of that. Recently, we've been working on making it sort of high-performance computer-enabled through parallel processing. It's available as open source, and it's also deployed as an ArcGIS toolbox so that you can go in and sort of run the tools in the sort of familiar ArcGIS toolbox mode, assuming you're an ArcGIS user. So the way that TOWDEM does vertical distance to stream is sort of depicted here. The D-infinity flow model apportions flow from each grid cell to up to 2 downslope grid cells, so that it can represent on average the flow path sort of going down perpendicular to contours, not trying to resolve it in only one of the directions, which is sort of 2 coarser resolution. So then, sort of following along that flow path, it backtracks, and it actually can compute distance in any one of modes. It can compute distance in a vertical sense, in a horizontal sense, or along the slope, or along the straight line. So there was quite a lot of options there. Here we are using the case where we have the vertical distance to the stream measured as the input. And then this is the example that you get in terms of a floodplain map where, and these are numbers that I made up just for illustration. There's a height associated with each catchment, and that then is used to map the potential flooding within that catchment. So the threshold is different depending on the catchment that you're in. I just put this slide in quickly to point out that while we developed that algorithm and published it in this paper that sort of spoke about all of these distances, the idea of using height above the nearest drainage to map flooding should really be credited to Nobre, who published it in these papers in Journal of Hydrology and Hydrologic Processes. So there's also a need in the hydraulic models to have hydraulic properties for each reach. And it's sort of been quite interesting to me that we can actually use the height above the nearest stream idea to get that information as well, and really get reach averaged properties. So for each catchment in the area we're dealing with, you can look at each height and identify cells where the height above the stream of that cell is less than a specific height. Each cell has a plan area that's evaluated based on its cell size. So the surface area of the channel associated with the height is really just a sum of those plan areas. You can approximate the bed area by summing the bed area of each sloping grid cell. So take the surface area and multiply it by 1 plus the slope squared, which effectively scales it for the it being on a sloping plane. And then you've got the wetted bed. You can get the volume by basically just summing up the volumes in all of the cells, the height times the area. And then with surface area, bed area, and volume, you can get the cross-sectional area is the volume divided by length, and that becomes an average cross-sectional area. Wetted perimeter as the bed area divided by length, the top width surface area divided by length, and then the hydraulic radius is the cross-section divided by the wetted perimeter. So you get these reach averaged properties out of this terrain analysis procedure, which is quite interesting. This shows how it works for one specific catchment that I was using for illustration. So here I used 2 heights of 1 meter and 3 meter and evaluated the various quantities and the various formulas and checked that the numbers seemed reasonable. And then we went and applied the computer to evaluate it over a range of heights. So you can see how hydraulic radius, cross-sectional area, top width, and all of those quantities vary as the depth varies. I should point out in doing this, so this is being calculated from a digital elevation model raster with knowledge of the location of the positions of the streams. So the sort of answers that you get are only going to be as good as that digital elevation model raster. If you've got a really coarse digital elevation model, it's going to perhaps miss the streams and introduce errors in some of these parameters. It also requires consistency between where the streams are and the digital elevation model. And for those of you who are familiar with working with elevation data and hydrography data, you will have noticed that there's often inconsistencies between the two. So for this particular calculation, we map the streams consistent with the digital elevation model, but starting each one of them where NHD plus streams start. And that was done so that we basically had a stream network that was consistent with the digital elevation model, but at the same density as the National Hydrography Dataset. So the streams are basically in the bottom of the valleys. But this really speaks to the need for consistency across data sets. Didn't always work perfectly, and this slide shows one of the problems that occurs. The digital elevation model dataset has a road here. The hydrography dataset says the stream goes across or really underneath the road, and you can sort of see that in the shading of the DEM. But when we applied the process, it actually took the stream off to the north, and it eventually joined up. So there's a need for a hydrography conditioned digital elevation model and consistency across these data sets. So that's essentially the example for how hydrography and elevation data are being combined to help with the National Flood Interoperability Experiment. I wanted to take some time to sort of talk about some of the other modeling use cases, and I'm going back to draw on some of the work that I've done with the Forest Service on their GRAPE program, Geomorphologic Road Analysis Inventory Program, to examine the impact on streams from road erosion. So this takes information from a detailed hydrography network that gives you the streams. It takes a digital elevation model to look at the terrain-derived flow field. It takes field surveys of road and drainage point conditions. So here we have one of the Forest Service technicians driving on the road with a GPS and with a computer that's being used for data capture. And they'll actually go and report on the conditions of the road surface in terms of its likelihood to be generating sediment. So this is another case of where modeling can be improved by providing more detailed, spatially explicit information. Then, based on each of the road segments involved, there's an aggregation of the sediment from roads to the drain points, and then from the drain points to the streams. So here the digital elevation model is providing road-to-stream connectivity. While they're doing this, they will also stop at each drain point and assess whether it's sort of clear or a barrier for fish passage. And that allows fragmentation in the stream network to be identified. So you can say, so in this case, I hope you're seeing where my mouse is. The yellow ones are sort of partially blocked, so this would become a fragmented part of the stream network as far as fish are concerned. So this just gives some of the results from one of the reports that used this approach, showing for each road segment where there's low, moderate, and high sediment production, that can be factored into prioritizing the maintenance and prioritizing the repair, and also combining it with those sediments that are those road segments that are producing a lot of sediment. which drain points do they drain to, which streams do they impact. So here we've got the sediment input to streams illustrated. Again, it's a sort of spatially explicit prioritization based on additional information being mapped onto a hydrography network. Part of this all relates to the question of where do streams begin? There is a challenge in mapping. As we go to higher and higher resolutions, we end up with streams sort of creeping further up the network. So I wanted to just dwell on that a little bit. And I went to a sample part of the NHD Plus high resolution that Al sent me. I guess this is probably part that's just been made public with the new release, but I think he sent it to me before that happened. And I honed in on an area in southwest North Carolina where it's actually at really high resolution, and just looked at the differences. And here you can see this, I put a 40-meter contour interval on this map so that you could get a sense of what the topography is. But we can see that the high-resolution hydrography is giving us a stream network at so much more detail than we had out of NHD Plus, which is really the medium-resolution hydrography. So there comes to be a question: would you infer from these contours that there really are all these additional streams, or if you go and looked on the landscape, would you actually find water flowing in them? Because sometimes there's regulatory decisions and modeling decisions that have to get made based on this. Getting philosophical for a little bit, there's two interesting quotes from the literature that I think pose alternative but equally valid views. The first one is from really long ago. Davis, the well-known geographer, wrote, "Although the river and hillside waste do not resemble each other at first sight, they are only the extreme members of a continuous series. And when this generalization is appreciated, one may fairly extend the river all over its basin and up to its very divides. Ordinarily treated, the river is like the veins of a leaf. Broadly viewed, it is like the entire leaf." So he's sort of hinting at the need for thinking of the hill slope and the channels in an integrated fashion. Montgomery and Dietrich more recently said landscape dissection into distinct valleys is limited by a threshold of channelization that sets a finite scale to the landscape. So they were recognizing that there perhaps is a real physical scale that represents drainage density. I think that's actually important for us to try and address and quantify, because hydrologic processes are different in hill slopes and in channels. I think it's important to recognize this and account for this in the delineation of streams. So the question of where streams begin, once we're in a stream, we think of the area as being concentrated. When you're on a hill slope, drainage areas actually measured using a dispersed concept of specific catchment area, the contributing area per unit contour width. So those are just some of the things that, there's a difference between hill slope and channel processes. If I go back to that same area that I showed you earlier and delineate the catchment draining to each stream segment, and here I've shown catchments because they're often used as our basic modeling elements. And within each modeling element, sometimes the parameters we use are things like the hill slope length. And regardless of what the model is that you're using, you're going to get a different answer from the left to the right, because the left one is going to say that the hill slope lengths are so much larger, and that's going to manifest itself. So as we start bringing high-resolution data into hydrologic models, we have to think about the differences in scales and how they're going to manifest in process simulations. So that's the sort of last pictorial slide, and I just wanted to end with a few conclusions. elevation and hydrography should really just be viewed as parts of an integrated representation for the terrestrial environment. It's important to try and have them be consistent and develop automated procedures to derive them in a consistent way. The integrated use of the different data sets really demands consistency between elevation and hydrography at high resolution. I talked about the height above the nearest stream approach as a way to approximate real-time flood and inundation and approximate reach scale properties. And then in thinking about where streams begin, noted that model representations should recognize scale effects. So thank you, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
All right, thank you, David. So I know we have about 5 minutes for a few questions for David, if you'd like. Again, reminder to use the Q&A box in the WebEx interface, if you would.
So I guess the only questions I'm seeing so far are about availability of the slides, and it looks like Allison's answered them.
Well, perhaps you explained everything so thoroughly, it's beyond question.
So I have a question. Where does the stream shape come from?
So are you referring to the stream shape in the hydraulic properties? So the cross-sectional shape is actually part of the digital elevation model. So involved in this work, we would need to have, if we think back to this slide is actually characterizing shape, but it's an average shape over the length of the reach, and it's been derived from the individual elevation value grid cells over the area, and it all depends on how good your digital elevation model is. The digital elevation model is presumed to be able to adequately represent the stream bed. Is that good enough? So then there was a question about how do we get the TAUDEM tool in ArcGIS. If you just do a Google search for TAUDEM, it'll take you to the website.
And there was also a link in your slides,
there was also a link in my slides, yes.
And those slides will be posted on the NHD website. Another question, have you tried estimating channel hydraulic properties in different stream environments?
No, this is still a very new idea. So we've been exploring and piloting it in the sort of Austin, Texas area, which is where the focus for this part of the work of NIFI was involved. But it's something we certainly would like to do. So the scale of the digital elevation model, this work was done using a 10-meter digital elevation model. So it was the standard digital elevation model you can now get from the National Elevation Dataset. There are parts of the country where you can get it at 3-meter resolution, often derived from LiDAR. In the particular area we were working, that was not available. There's a question here. Any comments on the potential differences between arid and humid environments? Obviously with arid and humid environments, it's going to make a difference in terms of the runoff being simulated, the runoff processes, and I think in terms of, I don't know whether there's a sort of good, well-established patterns for the differences in shape of channels in in arid and humid regions. But this might be an interesting way to see once we get to high enough resolution data. One thing that is possibly of value is it'll be easier to get data for arid regions because there would tend to be less forest canopy that's making the data acquisition or giving the data acquisition trouble. And you might also have really the digital elevation model should be recording the bed of the streams, and if you've got water flowing in it, most digital elevation models actually record the water surface, so you're leaving out some of the part below the surface. In arid areas where streams are smaller and drier, that's probably less of a problem. Okay, so somebody asked here, it can be argued that roads are all first-order streams that conduct water into the natural hydrography. Should we account for that in our models? Yes, I think that we should, and with the work with GRAPE, that's what we were trying to do. Trying to look at the sediment generated from road surfaces and where it goes to in terms of drain points. One can also, with high resolution topography, see the impact that roads have on redirecting flow paths. Sometimes they will serve as stream paths if they're sort of incised into the terrain. Oftentimes a road is up above the terrain on fill, so it's not always comparable to a stream. How do your models perform using 10-meter NED DEMs versus 2-meter LiDAR-derived DEMs? So we haven't actually done that yet. I mean, my sense is that it'll work better with the LiDAR data. Have you found benefits in using 1 meter over 3 meter DMs resampled from 1 meter? Again, that's not something that we've directly evaluated. So I guess what we might say is that there's a whole lot of questions that come up with as to, is higher resolution data better, and what advantage do you have? And there's a lot of work to be done in actually really proving out the added value from all of that. Somebody asked about Sprint being available on GitHub. I don't know the URL. I would have to search for that, but we can track that down from Dr. Maidment or Ben Hodges and give it as part of the information at the end of this, or the follow-up from the seminar, I guess.
Hey, David, let's cut this off for right now.
Okay.
And we'll pass the ball to Al, please. And then we'll come back and we can do questions about either session after Al and Ellen finish their talks.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, though. That's a lot of good, after a little initial lag there, and a lot of good questions coming in.
Okay. So, well, I'd first like to thank Dr. Tarbotton for a really interesting talk, and I think he pointed out the need for the data that has been used a lot in the modeling, particularly the NIFI modeling that he talked about, the NHD+. And if you're not already aware, we are working on basically expanding NHD+ to use the high-resolution NHD. So we are working on that, and this is kind of a quick status update on what we're doing along those lines. And Ellen Finelli, who is with the National Geospatial Technical Operations Center, or NGTOC, she is the hydrography lead at NGTOC, and she'll be helping explain some of this in a few minutes here as I get through this. So basically, try to be real quick here. What's the NHD Plus high resolution going to look like? It basically looks an awful lot like the medium resolution NHD Plus version 2. It has snapshots of the basic ingredient data, which are the high resolution NHD, the watershed boundaries data set, and 10-meter DEMs from the 3DEP program. It also has the value-added attributes, very similar to the NHD Plus version 2. It has catchments and flow direction and accumulation grids, again, just like version 2. This table has a comparison of the two products between the medium resolution NHD Plus version 2 and what we're building now with NHD Plus high res. So it's basically the elevation, we're going from a 30-meter elevation model to a 10-meter elevation model. We're going from 1 to 100,000 scale hydrography data to the highest resolution NHD data, whatever is in the NHD. In some cases, that's very high resolution, 1 to 2,400 scale or 1 to 5,000 scale. Most of the country, it's 1 to 24,000 scale from the USGS topo maps. And in Alaska, it's 1 to 63,360. The watershed boundaries data set, we used a snapshot for version 2 of NHD Plus. It was kind of a composite of several different snapshots of WBD taken between 2010 and 2012. So we'll be using an updated WBD for high-res NHD Plus. We're changing from shapefiles and grids to file geodatabases and TIFFs because those behave much better with these really large data sets that we're using. And we're changing tile size from basically a region or a HUC 2 level to a HUC 4 level. So there will be about 200 HUC 4s in the continental U.S. that will make up the tiles that this data will be produced in. And then we've updated the tools from the tools that were used to produce NHD Plus Medium Res version 2 to a set of tools using the same basic processes but updated for the high resolution data. So here's just a picture. I'll show you just a little bit of a sneak preview, really, of the NHD Plus high res. So this is an area where I'm showing the streams and the catchments from version 2, which again is 1 to 100,000 scale streams and 30-meter elevation model. Here's that same area in the NHD Plus high res streams and catchments. And here you can see those two together. So it's quite a bit more detail and quite a bit more data, just finer delineations on all of the catchments. So how are we going to build the NHD Plus high res? As I mentioned, we're adapting the tools that were used to build NHD Plus version 2, and we're really trying to emphasize automation. The version 2 tools had quite a lot of manual work involved, and we're trying to automate as much of that as possible. There still are a few steps that are manual. And then overall, we're trying to build basically an iterative process where we'll do an initial run through the data, which basically will be a beta version of the data. We'll try to do that first, then we'll move into a QC review where we'll be using the old version 2, version 2.1, the medium res data as one check of the data. Of course, we'll also have lots of other things that we'll want to check it against. And then we'll be moving pretty quickly into a refresh cycle where we will update that initial beta version at least once as soon as we can, really. And then that refresh could continue at later times after the data's been updated more. So it'll be kind of a continuous refresh cycle, but we'll definitely do one refresh. And finally, we'll be working a lot on generalization, so that the idea behind that is that we want to try and get the entire community working off of this one basic framework, which we can then generalize from to many different scales. So let me show a little bit about how that works. This is Region 6, the Tennessee River Basin, and this is what's in the high-res NHD right now. You can see that there are some areas that are very dense. Most of the data is basically a 1 to 24,000 scale. It's the data from the USGS 1 to 24,000 topo maps. But there have been several areas where it's been densified quite a lot. In the North Carolina, they did a lot of work from LIDAR data and have densified the network quite a bit there. So this is what's in the NHD high-res, and this is what we'll create catchments for. But we also will be trying to normalize that to several different scales, that network to several different scales. So this is the network kind of normalized to 1 to 24,000 scale. This is using some techniques that Larry Stanislawski and others have developed. And then, so we can continue on, we've got a 1 to 100,000 scale representation, 1 to 250,000, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, and 5 million scale representation of all of the network. Now, all of the features that you see are actually the original high-resolution features. The network has just been pruned out selectively to represent these the network at these different scales. What we'll be working on is also a way to basically merge the catchments together as we do this generalization, so that we'll have networks and catchments for several different scales, but they all reference back to the high resolution NHD data. So with that, I'm going to pass on to Ellen Finelli, and she's going to talk a little bit more about the process and where we are.
Okay, thank you, Al. So as Al mentioned, rather than reinventing the wheel as we are producing this high-res NHD+, we're really adapting the version 2 medium res, or the NHD+ version 2. So as well as automating some of those processes. So we are fortunate to be able to utilize some of the same development team, and that's primarily Cindy McKay with Horizon System, and our USGS Water Science Center folks, Curtis Price, Rich Moore, and Craig Johnson. And so no worries here in this lightning session. We're not going to get too into the weeds here on this workflow, but I did want to point out a couple of things. Currently, the yellow boxes are some of the manual steps, and that's where Al had mentioned that ideally we want to minimize that additional manual requirements there. Next slide. So there's really three different parts of this workflow, or these tools. And the first part is the value-added attributes, which are the vector aspect of this. Next is the catchments, which are the raster processes. And then finally, the last part of this is the flow estimates. So together, that is the high-res NHD+ build refresh process. Next slide. So let's take a little bit, step back a little bit and look at that entire workflow that I just mentioned is the red box here at the middle of the screen. Our high-res NHD Plus tools, build refresh, does all of that, VAA, catchments, and flow estimations. So let's take a look back at some of the inputs here. So we have at the top in the blue our NHD and our WB data sets that are snapshots that are coming from our high-res NHD production database. And as Al mentioned, that is a multi-resolution database. It is the best available hydrography data. And those snapshots, NHD and WBD, go into the build refresh. Additionally, we have our digital elevation model data, in this case coming from our 3DEP program, the 1/3 ARC seamless data are the three inputs to this. And so initially, we are going to run the build aspect of our NHD Plus tools, and we're going to produce our first initial cut being our high-res NHD Plus, this beta data set. And as Al mentioned, a little change here due to the resolution and the size of the data sets. We are producing these by region, but distributing them by HUC4s. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the build part of the beta. And as Al mentioned, we don't want to necessarily leave that out there for too long. The intent is to go directly into a QC process. And then through that QC effort, the results then would be fed back in, and actually editing would be required, so manual editing to update our high-res NHD Plus production, our high-res production database, our NHD and WBD database. Next slide. And then we would produce an updated NHD and WBD that would then feed into the refresh process. Let me make one more note before we go to the next slide. Although we may not be feeding updates to the elevation program or edits to the elevation program through our markup tools, the elevation program has quite an aggressive schedule as is. And so as we revisit these updated NHD and WBD, of course we will be incorporating the new elevation data as well. Next slide. So once we've updated the NHD WBD and we bring in our new 3DEP data, then we're going to be building what I'll call the refresh part of the, or utilizing the refresh part of the tools and producing then, in this case, a new snapshot being the high-res NHD Plus. The drivers for that, of course, for running that refresh could be issues identified during the QC process, or it could be, as we go down the road, just changes in our source data. So we have new elevation data, we have new NHD or WBD data. Another thing I wanted to mention, well, actually, next slide, Al. I think I had it on the next slide. So in terms of getting those edits accomplished, we have a number of NHD and WBD editors that will participate in this QC, as well as our stewardship or partners that actively update NHD and WBD. So they will maybe be involved with the editing from this QA/QC. So we visualize a national oversight team participating in this QC. Some of the other folks that are the ones with that local knowledge, whether that be our stewards participating in the QC, or stream stats folks or other water science center folks that have that local knowledge. One of the tools we plan on utilizing for this QC is a web-enabled markup tool, and so we'll be working closely with that team to provide us the ability to track and quickly refresh our high-res NHD Plus. Next slide. I think that's about all I had in our time. Oh, one more. Sorry. Our priorities currently are Region 1, Region 6, and Region 12, the three shown in the dark red. And we currently have a draft schedule to do the nation in the following order. So we have contracted the first 18 regions, so everything except for Alaska and Hawaii. But at this point, that is our current plan. And we have, as Al mentioned, completed our initial beta for 3 of the 4 HUC4s in Region 6 there. And David had shown an example there, which of course was that one eastern North Carolina chunk that had some local res data in there as well. That's our current status for the beta version for NHD+. Next, I think that's about it for now. Any questions?
Okay, and then again, I'd refer the questions to the Q&A box. And Al, if you could pass the ball directly to Allison, she will get the poll going. Thank you.
Yep. So,
all right.
We do have a few questions. I'm trying to find them here in the Q&A box. Let's see. Will the vector data be available in GeoPackage or Spatialite formats as well as file geodatabase?
At this point, we don't have plans to do that, no. I guess that's good feedback that there's interest in that, though.
And is there a plan for the build refresh tools to be made available to local partners and stewards?
Yes, sir. We plan to make the tools available as open source. We don't have current plans to support them, so we'll put them out as open source, and people would be able to take them and modify them. But we don't have plans to actually have that as a supported package that that others would be doing and feeding back into the database. At this point, we expect to run the process ourselves or through. Right now, it's being run through a contractor.
Great. And is there a plan for a high-res pilot project in Alaska?
Yes, we want to do some work in Alaska. The current state of the data in Alaska is a little bit, it's a little early, I think, to start doing that, but there are some areas where the data is getting close to being ready. So as that data reaches a point where we think it would make sense to move forward with a pilot, then we'll be looking at doing some pilot areas up there.
Okay, great. And is there a high-res NHD Plus schedule available, or are you just working with priority areas at this point?
Yeah, we don't really have a schedule yet. We're still really early in the process. We are kind of working through the process, so it doesn't. We don't have a good handle yet on how long it takes to get through all of this. So hopefully, we're getting close to the point where we'll be able to have a better handle on that and be able to put out at least an approximate schedule, but we're not quite yet to that point.
And will the edits/updates to the NHD be run first through the base high-res NHD and then imported to high-res NHD Plus?
Yes, they will. So we will continue to use our NHD update tools that allows us to ensure our QC processes are adhered to. Then the data will be fed into the NHD Plus process.
Okay, well, we're a couple minutes over time. We will have the questions, so the entire package here, the presentations, the Q&A, and the recording will be posted to the NHD website, nhd.usgs.gov. And I want to thank the speakers for coming out today and sharing this information. I want to thank the crowd for attending and doing a nice job on the Q&A session here. And I also want to invite folks to tune in on St. Patrick's Day. Share St. Patrick's Day with us and find out about hydrography applications in fisheries and aquatic ecosystems. We'll have announcements that go out through the same channels, listservs, et cetera, with information to register for these. And then at last, I direct you to the poll that should be in the lower right of your WebEx window. If you take a few seconds to just provide a little bit of feedback for us, it'll help us shape these sessions in the future. So I guess with that, we'll call it a session, and hope to see you back here on St. Patrick's Day. All right? Thanks, everyone.